Are you sure you know what really stopped the Mongols from conquering Europe? Or have you just been repeating a cool-sounding myth? Because the thing that destroyed their invasion wasn't knights in shining armor, it wasn't castles, and it definitely wasn't some miracle new weapon Europeans invented at the last second. It was something way stranger and way more human. Picture Europe in the early 1200s. Most people have never heard the word Mongol. Villagers worry about taxes, bad harvests, maybe raiders from the next kingdom over. The usual problems. Then rumour starts to spread. Whole cities in the east have been burned to the ground. Armies have disappeared. Refugees talk about riders who shoot arrows while galloping faster than you can sprint. About men who seem to come out of nowhere, vanish into the distance, and then appear again behind you. And then one day, for people living in places like Poland, Hungary, and the lands of Kievan Rus, it stops being a rumour. You see smoke on the horizon, you hear hooves, you watch your world crack open. We normally hear about the Mongols destroying everyone in Asia, China, Central Asia, the Islamic world, but in the 1240s they didn't just threaten Europe. They actually invaded it, smashed multiple European armies, and moved deep into the continent. And then they left. That's the weird part. The Mongols win battle after battle. They crush some of the best knights and best armies Europe can put together. People panic. And then, suddenly, the invincible horsemen turn around and ride back east. So what happened? If you ask random people online, you'll hear all kinds of answers. It was European castles. It was the longbow. It was heavy knights. It was the weather. Or the classic dramatic line, Europe was saved by a miracle. But here's the twist. Most of those explanations are wrong, or at least only tiny pieces of the story. The real secret weapon that destroyed the Mongol invasion of Europe was not a weapon in the usual sense at all. To really see what it was, we need to clear away a lot of myths and look closely at how the Mongols fought, what they wanted in Europe, and what was happening thousands of kilometers away in Mongolia while their horsemen were burning cities on the edge of the West. Because that's where the real answer is hiding. Let's set up the basic challenge first. Imagine you're a European ruler in the 1240s. You've heard stories about this army from the east that moves faster than anything you've ever seen. They don't march slowly like normal armies. They ride. They can cover insane distances in a day. They travel with spare horses, so they always have fresh mounts. They don't just come at you in a straight line. They surround you. They fake retreats. They lure your knights into charges, then trap them. They're expert archers, shooting accurately from horseback. You and your knights are wearing armor, sure, but you're also big, heavy targets. How do you fight that? Your usual way of war is simple. Get your knights, your men-at-arms, your infantry, charge the enemy, break their line, and win. The Mongols don't play that game. So the problem is clear. Europe was facing something it had never really seen before on that scale. A highly organized, insanely mobile, battle-tested war machine that had already smashed through empires much richer and more powerful than any European kingdom at the time. If these guys couldn't be stopped in China or the Islamic world, why would tiny kingdoms in Poland or Hungary stop them? And yet, somehow, Europe survived. So the mystery we're trying to solve in this video is, what force, what secret weapon destroyed the Mongols' invasion of Europe when nothing on the battlefield seemed able to? Before we talk about what stopped them, we need to understand what made them so scary in the first place. Because the Mongols weren't just good horsemen. They were the complete package. Let's go through it in simple terms. First, they're soldiers. Most Mongol warriors grew up on the steppe, a huge grassland stretching across Eurasia. From a young age, kids were riding horses, hunting, shooting arrows. When you live like that, your entire life is training. By the time a boy became a warrior, he could hit targets while galloping at full speed. He wasn't a weekend archer. This was his whole lifestyle. Second, their army structure. The Mongols were organized in units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. It wasn't just a wild crowd of horsemen, it was a well-structured system, almost like a machine. They had commanders at each level. Orders moved quickly. They could split into several forces, attack from multiple directions, and then regroup. Third, their tactics. If you think of bravery as just charging straight at the enemy and swinging your sword, you totally misunderstand the Mongols. They preferred to win smart, not just hard. They used fake retreats. Pretend to run away, wait for the enemy to chase, then turn and hit them when they're scattered. Encirclements. Surround the enemy slowly, cutting off escape routes. Hit and run. Harass the enemy with arrows, never letting them get close. Psychological warfare, spreading fear, sending messages demanding surrender, showing what happened to cities that resisted. Fourth, their weapons and gear. The Mongols used a powerful composite bow made from horn, wood, and sinew. It was small enough to use on horseback, but strong enough to shoot far and hit hard. They also used lances, sabres, and sometimes maces. Their armour varied, but many wore lamellar armour, small plates tied together, and leather. They weren't unprotected. Fifth, their support system. We often forget this part. The Mongols had an entire system behind the scenes. Scouts who mapped the land, spies who learned about enemy politics, a relay system for sending messages, engineers borrowed from Chinese, Persian, and other cultures who operated siege machines like catapults and trebuchets. So, when the Mongols entered Europe, they weren't just some random nomads, they were an experienced empire army, already used to multi-front campaigns. And they had already done something similar. They had crushed the powers of Kiev and Rus before pushing further into Europe. Cities like Kiev were destroyed, Russian princes were killed or made into vassals. By the time the Mongols looked toward Poland and Hungary, they weren't trying out European war. They were on a roll. So again, the big question is, if this war machine rolled into Europe and crushed the first armies it met, what force was strong enough to stop it? Let's zoom in on what actually happened when the Mongols showed up. We're in the late 1230s and early 1240s. The Mongols, under Batu, a grandson of Genghis Khan, and Subutai, one of their greatest generals, have already smashed cities in the east. They destroyed major Rus cities and beat local princes in big battles. Now they look west. What lies in front of them? Fragmented kingdoms. Poland is divided into smaller principalities. Hungary is strong, but still just one kingdom with internal tensions. The Holy Roman Empire is a maze of princes and dukes. Communication between kingdoms is slow. Cooperation is weak. Perfect situation for the Mongols. They do what they do best, divide and crush. In 1241, the Mongols carry out a carefully planned campaign. They don't just pour into one place, they split their forces and attack multiple regions at once. While one Mongol army moves through Poland, another hits Hungary. Smaller detachments scout and raid across the region. Let's look at two famous battles. First, the Battle of Legnica, or Liegnitz, April 9, 1241. A European coalition army under Henry II the Pious of Silesia tries to face the Mongols in Poland. It includes knights and troops from various German and Polish regions, plus some of the famous military orders like the Templars or Teutonic Knights, depending on which source you read. On paper, that sounds impressive. In reality, it's a mess. The European army lacks unified command. They don't fully understand Mongol tactics. When the Mongols pretend to retreat, parts of the European army chase them without proper coordination. The result? Chaos. The Mongols then turn, attack the scattered troops, and break the army. Henry II is killed. His head is supposedly shown to defenders of nearby cities to scare them. So, if you ever heard the idea that the Mongols were stopped in Poland at Legnica, that's just wrong. They won there. Second, the Battle of Mohi, or the Battle of the Sejo River, April 11, 1241. Here, we're in Hungary. King Bela IV has gathered a large army. This is one of their main chances for Europe to stop the Mongols in a pitched battle. But the Mongols, again, aren't playing by European rules. They use night attacks, bridge assaults, and encirclements. They cross the river, hit the camp, and cause panic. Forced into a narrow space, many Hungarian troops can't fight properly. The army is shattered. Bela barely escapes. After Mohi, Hungary is wide open. Mongol forces rampage across the kingdom. Towns are destroyed. Villagers are killed or enslaved. The devastation is brutal. So if we look purely at the battlefield, it's clear. Mongols win at Legnica. Mongols win at Mohi. Mongols ravage Hungary. They raid into areas that today would be parts of Croatia, Austria, and other neighbouring regions. There is no magical European battlefield victory here that stops them. Instead, it feels like Europe is about to be steamrolled. So again, the question hits even harder. If the Mongols are winning, why do they suddenly pull back? And what about those popular stories like castles stopped them or armour saved Europe? Let's tackle those next. Over time, people have tried to explain why the Mongols didn't go all the way to Paris or Rome. A lot of those explanations sound nice. They make Europeans look heroic and clever. But when you look closely, many of them fall apart. Let's go through the big ones that get repeated all the time. Myth 1. European knights were too strong. We love the image of the heavy knight, big warhorse, plate armour, lance, shield. It's natural to imagine these tanks of the Middle Ages standing firm against the Mongol horse archers. But history doesn't support that fantasy. At Legnica and Mohi, knights were present, and they still lost. The problem wasn't that knights were weak, it's that their style of fighting wasn't suited to the Mongols' way of war. A head-on charge can be deadly if the enemy stands still and accepts it. The Mongols didn't. They pulled back, retreated, shot arrows, and forced knights to chase them. Once the knights were spread out and tired, the Mongols counterattacked. So, yes, European knights were brave and well-armed. But they did not destroy the Mongol invasion of Europe. If anything, the Mongols showed they could handle knights just fine. Myth 2. Castles stopped the Mongols. Castles did matter. Let's be fair, the Mongols were great at open-field battles and sieges, but Europe had a very dense network of stone fortresses. Not every castle was easy to take quickly. Some places had thick walls on hills with good water supply. That's annoying, even for Mongol siege engineers. So, castles slowed them down. But did castles destroy or stop the invasion? Not really. First, the Mongols had already taken big walled cities in other parts of the world. Chinese cities, Central Asian cities. They also captured or destroyed fortified towns in the Ruslands and in Hungary itself. Second, in Europe, they often just bypassed certain castles. They didn't have to take every stone building to keep moving. So castles were a factor, sure. They made full conquest harder. They protected some populations. They gave survivors safe places. But they were not some secret anti-Mongol weapon Europe suddenly used. Myth 3. The weather saved Europe. You'll hear people say the Mongols were steppe warriors, they couldn't handle European winters, or the climate was wrong for them. This also doesn't fully hold up. The Mongols were used to extremely cold winters on the steppe. They knew snow, ice and wind. They had warm clothing, hardy horses, and experience living outdoors. Plus, they had already campaigned in places much colder and harsher than Hungary. Now, climate and terrain did play a role. Swampy land, forests, rivers and mountains can slow cavalry and limit their favourite tactics. Flooding and mud in the spring might have made some operations harder in Hungary. But again, that doesn't explain why, after winning major battles and dominating the region, they suddenly left the entire theatre of war. The weather wasn't a new surprise to them. Myth 4. The Mongols were scared of Europe's combined strength. This one is half emotional, half hopeful. The idea is the Mongols saw how brave and tough Europeans were, got a taste of their knights and castles, and decided it wasn't worth it. But when you look at what actually happened, it's the opposite. The Mongols walked through most resistance. Europe's rulers struggled to even coordinate a response. The few big battles we know about ended in Mongol victories, not European ones. There is no sign the Mongols were scared of European strength in a military sense. So if it wasn't knights, castles, weather, or fear, what was it? This is where the story gets interesting. Because the answer lies far away from European battlefields. Here's the twist most people miss. At the same time Mongol horsemen were winning battles in Europe, the heart of the Mongol Empire was far away, in Mongolia and Central Asia, centered around the line of Genghis Khan. The Mongols didn't just have one king, they had a great Khan, the main ruler of the whole empire. After Genghis died, his son Ögedei became the great Khan. Ögedei wasn't just a random successor. He was the one pushing the massive expansion campaigns, giving generals like Subutai and Batu the support they needed to go conquer new lands. He had authority to allocate troops, resources, and give permission for long campaigns. While Batu and Subutai are deep inside Europe, something huge happens back home. Ögedei dies. To us today, that might sound like a simple power shift. To the Mongols, it blows up everything. Their entire political system is built around the idea that major decisions, including who the next great Khan should be, are made at a great council called a Kurultai. Who attends the Kurultai? The top princes, the major members of Genghis Khan's family, important commanders. And here's the key. Many of those princes are riding with the armies in Europe. If they stay in Europe and keep conquering, they can't influence who becomes the next great Khan. If someone they don't like or trust is chosen, their whole future power is at risk. So now, imagine you're Batu. You're far from home. You're leading an army that's winning. The road seems open to Central Europe, but you get news. Ögedei is dead. A succession crisis is coming. Your rivals back home, especially people from other branches of the family, might grab control if you're not there. What do you do? Stay and conquer some more castles, or secure your position in the center of power? In Mongol culture and politics, the choice is obvious. You go back. This is why so many historians point to Ögedei's death as the main reason the Mongols suddenly stopped their European campaign and pulled out. Think about how wild that is. Europe's real secret weapon was the heart of an old man thousands of kilometers away giving out. No genius new technology, no heroic last-stand victory on the battlefield. Just one man dying at the wrong time for the Mongols and the entire invasion losing its driving force. It's almost funny in a dark way. The thing that destroyed the Mongol invasion of Europe wasn't even in Europe. It was Mongol politics. But let's go deeper for a second. Ögedei's death is the main trigger. But behind that trigger, there is another slow, quiet weapon working against the Mongol invasion of Europe. Time and distance. Here's what I mean. The Mongol Empire at its peak stretched over a huge chunk of the world. That kind of empire is powerful, but it's also fragile in some ways. The further you go from your core, the harder it is to move supplies, move messages, move reinforcements, control local politics. Europe was very far from the Mongol heartland. By the time the Mongols hit Hungary and Poland, they had already been campaigning for years. Men and horses had done long marches. Bridges had to be built or destroyed. Siege equipment had to be moved or constructed. Campaigns take a toll. Every month on campaign means horses die or become weak. Arrows and equipment need replacing. Local food sources get used up. Resistance hardens. In other words, the Mongols were strong but not gods. They still had limits. At some point, if you keep going forward, your army gets stretched too thin. You're far from your base. You have enemies behind you, and you're deep in a region full of fortified towns. In Europe, they were entering a landscape with lots of stone castles, lots of rivers, lots of different local powers. It would take time to truly conquer and organize all of that. Time they did not have once the great Khan died. So the secret weapon is actually a combination. The sudden trigger, Ögedei's death, and the need for key princes to return for the Kurultai. The background pressure, distance from home, long campaigns, and the reality that conquering Europe would be a slow, grinding process, not a quick raid. Put that together and the logic for the Mongols looks like this. We've shown we can reach Europe. We've crushed their armies. We've terrified them. Our reputation is massive. But now we need to go home and make sure the empire itself doesn't fall apart. That's not fear of Europe's strength. That's choosing empire politics over one more frontier. Let's pull the threads together and zoom in on the turning point. Imagine the scene from a storytelling angle. It's 1241, 1242. Europe is burning. In Hungary, fields lie empty where villages once stood. Survivors hide in forests, marshes, mountains, and stone castles. King Bela IV is running from place to place, trying to pull something together. In Poland and nearby regions, people remember Legnica. Priests preach about God's anger, the end times, or divine punishment. Rumors spread faster than facts. At the same time, the Mongol camps are full of noise. Horses snort and stomp. Commanders argue over the next steps. Scouts bring back news of western lands. Messengers ride in from the east, and then, at some point, the key message arrives. The Great Khan is dead. From our point of view, centuries later, it's just a date in a book. For them, it's like a bomb. Because now everything is up in the air. Who will rule the empire? Will rivals gain control? What will happen to Batu's position? Will the generals get blamed if they keep pushing west and something goes wrong back home? The army that looked like a single beast suddenly remembers it's made of humans with careers, families, rivalries, ambitions. They are not just the Mongols. They are princes, generals, nobles, all connected to power back in Mongolia. You can almost imagine the discussions. Do we keep going? If we ride to Vienna or beyond, we'll be months away from the Kurultai. If we're not there when the decision is made, our enemies might choose a Khan who hates us. And then what? We'll be stuck in Europe, far from home, serving someone who wants to cut us down. The smarter choice is clear. Turn back now. While your army is still strong, your reputation is intact, and your rivals haven't yet locked you out of the succession. So, that's what they do. The Mongols begin to pull out of Europe. And just like that, the invasion of Europe, this nightmare that looked unstoppable, is over. Not because they were defeated on the battlefield, not because some genius inventor came up with a special anti-Mongol weapon, but because politics, time, and distance did what swords and arrows could not. That's the climax of the story. The greatest military threat Europe had ever seen was destroyed not by Europe, but by the Mongols' own empire system. Now, just because the secret weapon was Ögedei's death and Mongol politics doesn't mean Europe did nothing that mattered. Europe got a lot wrong, but it also did a few things right. Let's look at both. What Europe did wrong. 1. Poor coordination. Kingdoms were slow to help each other. Hungary and Poland faced separate Mongol forces without a strong united command. Messages took too long. Agreements were weak. 2. Underestimating the Mongols at first. Some rulers treated them like just another steppe-raiding group, not realizing this was an empire with serious organization and siege skills. 3. Sticking to old tactics. Charging with knights worked against familiar enemies, but not against fast-moving horse archers using fake retreats and encirclements. European commanders were slow to adjust. What Europe did right. 1. Using terrain and fortifications. Not every region was easy for the Mongols to use their favorite tactics. Forests, mountains, and rivers limited their movements, and castles gave people safe places to hold out. The Mongols could not be everywhere at once. 2. Learning from the shock. After the invasion, some European rulers, like Bela IV of Hungary, took the experience as a warning. They built more stone castles, strengthened borders, and tried to make the kingdom harder to invade again. 3. Not giving up. Even though the Mongols did horrible damage, Europe didn't simply collapse. Local resistance, even if scattered and often ineffective in big battles, still forced the Mongols to spread out and spend time. In a way, you could say Europe survived long enough for the Mongol political crisis to kick in. If the Mongols had already had a secure Great Khan and a clear line of succession, things might have gone very differently. Which brings us to a chilling question. Let's play the what-if game for a moment. What if Ögedei had not died when he did? Or what if the Mongols had decided, you know what? We'll sort out succession later, let's just keep pushing west for a few more years. We'll never know for sure, but we can make some careful guesses. If the Mongols kept going, they likely would have hit places like Vienna and maybe pushed deeper into the Holy Roman Empire. More regions of Europe would have faced the same kind of destruction Hungary experienced. European rulers might have finally tried harder to coordinate, but it's not clear if they would have succeeded in time. Could Europe have produced a general who figured out how to fight them better? Possibly. But remember, Asian powers tried for years to stop the Mongols and mostly lost, at least at first. The idea that Europe would magically do better right away with less unity and fewer resources isn't very realistic. More likely, we'd be telling a story today about how far the Mongols made it into Europe instead of why did they stop in Hungary. We might be talking about Mongol influence on German or Italian politics, not just Russian and Hungarian. So in a strange way, Europe's survival in the 1240s really does look like a giant stroke of luck, backed by geography and time. Europe's secret weapon wasn't bravery or technology, it was the calendar. Let's step back and compare the myth version and the real version. Myth version. The Mongols stormed into Europe, but brave knights and strong castles stopped them. Europe's superior weapons and courage destroyed the invasion. It's a nice story. It flatters European pride. It makes people feel like their ancestors beat the most feared army in the world. But the facts don't match. Fact-based version. The Mongols stormed into Europe, crushed the armies that faced them, devastated entire regions, and then left mainly because the Great Khan died and their leaders had to go home to fight over the throne. Castles, terrain and distance made conquests slower and harder, but they didn't defeat the Mongols in battle. The invasion was destroyed from the inside by Mongol politics and timing. That version isn't as flattering. It makes Europe look weak and lucky, but it's way closer to the truth, and honestly, it's also way more interesting, because it teaches us something important about history. Huge events don't always end with a simple battle decides everything moment. Sometimes what looks like a secret weapon is actually a mix of politics, timing, and geography. And a lot of we beat them with our courage and steel stories are just comforting myths people tell later. In the case of the Mongol invasion of Europe, the real power wasn't in some new European weapon. It was in how the Mongol Empire itself worked, and how fragile that kind of giant empire can be when the man at the top dies at the wrong moment. So, let's answer the big question clearly. What was the secret weapon that destroyed the Mongols in the invasion of Europe? It wasn't knights, castles, weather, or some hidden piece of European technology. The secret weapon was the combination of Ögedei Khan's death, which forced key Mongol leaders to return home to decide the next great Khan. The huge distance between Europe and the Mongol heartland, which made long campaigns risky and fragile. Time itself, working against an army stretched across a continent. Europe did play a role. Its castles and terrain slowed the Mongols down. Its scattered resistance meant the Mongols had to spend time and effort holding and burning lands. But what truly destroyed the invasion wasn't anything Europe invented. It was the fact that even the strongest empire in the world couldn't escape its own internal problems. In the end, the Mongols didn't lose Europe on the battlefield. They lost it around a campfire at a Kurultai. They chose the throne over the frontier, and Europe, without really knowing why at the time, got to breathe again. If you could go back and ask a villager hiding in a Hungarian forest in 1242 what weapons saved them, they might say God, or our king, or the castle on the hill. But from where we stand now, with all the sources and hindsight, we can say the weapon that saved them was a heart stopping in Mongolia and a group of princes deciding that power at home mattered more than more land far away. That's the strange, almost unbelievable truth behind the myth. Tap subscribe for more real Mongol history without the fake myths.